All right, welcome everybody to the joint work session of the Vineyard Planning Commission and City Council. The time is 5:10 p.m. on Monday, February 24th, and we are just going to jump right into the joint work session. So I've asked that Morgan kick us off and get us started, and then we'll jump into discussion points 2.1 and 2.2.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a kind of exciting time. We're finally getting to the point where we're getting the zoning code pulled together. So most of you have seen the town center plan and the concepts. It's been further refined, and this code, the amendments to the town center code, are going to help to implement it so that it meets kind of the current vision that we've been presented. One thing I wanted to point out. I sent everyone copies of the draft code and a series of a list of edits. Just realize that we're going to try to kind of stay out of the weeds. Staff is in the process of doing a kind of a deep dive, and we're going to meet a lot with the applicants to get the code kind of pulled together so that it truly kind of meets what the city wants. And we believe that so far it looks pretty good, but there are some things that need to be addressed. So what I would recommend is allow the applicant to go through the project. They'll provide an overview and of kind of where they started and where we're at now, and an overview of the code as well. Following that, we for the I believe it's the county grant, the tourism grant. And that's a pretty substantial grant. Eric Ellis from the Lake Commission basically brought that to our attention at the last retreat. So we have some really neat plans that we've worked with Anderson Geneva on to kind of get us an exhibit so we could break out projects and try and get funding for those. So it's connected to this project, but that'll be kind of the next item that we take. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Matt. Or to, yeah, great, come on up.
Pete Evans with Anderson Geneva Development. So just real quick before Matt comes up and presents the kind of the latest version of the project, just wanted to, I think Morgan's characterization of this being a refinement of the original plan is a great way to put it. We really appreciate the time and effort that staff has put in over the last couple of months as we've kind of worked towards this evolution and these iterations. I mean, what you're seeing is kind of the last iteration of a lot of intermediate plans as they've gone through, and as we've kind of knocked some of the rough corners off the plan as it's rolled through staff's hands, and we appreciate their hard work, and then also just the willingness of both the Planning Commission and the City Council and staff for accommodating a kind of a fast-paced schedule on this. We know that it's pushing pretty quickly, and we've got some deadlines that we're trying to hit to get infrastructure in, for example, for the front runner station and some other things. So I know it's unusual to meet on a Monday night, and there's a lot of people that have cleared some things off schedules to be here, so we appreciate it. As Matt goes through it, we also have Jeff Speck on speakerphone. I'm pointing to the counter, which probably doesn't make sense, but he's actually here inside this tiny technological box. So he'll be listening and be able to answer questions as well. And so as Matt goes through the presentation, he'll kind of go through the evolution and the iterations. One of the reasons why he probably wouldn't tell you this, but one of the reasons why we've really enjoyed working with their firm is because when we have pushed back on things, they don't just say, well, this is what we like. They've done enough projects around the country and around the world where they can say, well, this is why we're doing it this way, and this is how it's worked, and this is what doesn't work in these other places. And so we've really appreciated the experience that they bring on these projects, and kind of the practical application of a lot of the academic things that we tried to incorporate into a plan, and being able to refine it and evolve it into a plan that I think is really close to being able to execute on the vision that we kind of all collectively have for this piece of property. So thanks again, Matt.
Sure, thanks. Matt Lambert with DPZ, and so there's a lot of mention of presenting the overall project, and I didn't know that, but if you want me to do it, I've got it on here as well. So if you have questions, I've sort of got all the exhibits lived in this other device here on the desk. Mostly what I have are talking points on the code and our focus that's, that we've really been working at from a code standpoint to implement the plan. Getting started with that, we sort of bounced back and forth on what direction to go for the code to ensure that we can implement the changed vision, and we really went towards this, tweak where we have to tweak, and find ways to work from what you've already built, and actually I think we've done that pretty well. We actually have a number of new renderings. They got finalized in the last few days. I have a few of them. The rest are on my computer as well. What we've also been hounded by their schedule on is getting into great detail in terms of transportation and the design of all the first roads that they're looking to move pretty quickly on. And it really is not common that you're starting construction of roadbed and you ask us this question that AG has. Is this the right place? Is this the right design? And for us to say, well, we think we need to tweak this and really focus on placemaking, and here's how you do it. And to have them stop what they were doing sort of midstream and get going on a new vision, that doesn't happen often, and I do applaud that, on your side, from the development side. It's a lot of commitment to change. But what we want to do is make a place that you all can be proud of, and I think there's really nothing like this opportunity in the region. So we're toiling in addition to the code in CAD on the transit plaza and the interface with UTA and Market Street and this traffic square about and the promenade and so forth. So we've been diving deep into those details as well, which has actually helped us coordinate on looking at the details of the code. So just in general, I'll talk about these 6 things and then show you some points specifically about what we've done from a code standpoint. As you can see on the cover, we've integrated some of the new graphics, in terms of what the vision is for the space. But in terms of an approach, it's basically, first, we wanted to retain as much as is practical, which is actually quite a lot of what was already there. Complete it by correcting some errors and enacting some concepts that were there, but they weren't fully enforceable yet the way the code was written. So we went through with a fine comb and really looked at every single provision and said, some of these need clarity, some of these need adjustment. Hey, there's a table missing for this one. And so we've made some adjustments there. We've detailed it further by expanding on concepts that were there, but they needed some completion. We've simplified in some places by removing some concepts that weren't really impactful. They weren't doing much. So you don't really need to be reviewing all those things. It's just unnecessary. And then we've aligned other areas by integrating details of the updated town center vision. And then we've augmented where necessary beyond that. So it's kind of the order of priority: retain, complete things, further detail, then simplify, align with the vision, and then where we had to, any larger augmentation. So there's not really much on retain. It's just we tried to retain as much as possible. The table of contents you'll see looks fairly similar. Almost everything's in the same place as before. Now, completing these, the few errors and enacting the concepts that weren't enforceable, this page shows one of those images, which is this frontage build-out is what we call it, or in the code it was called front property line coverage. And so that idea was in there, but it actually wasn't enacted anywhere in the code. So we've enacted it because it's a really important thing to ensure that buildings are up to the street and covering the front property, especially in this urban area. But then there's other minor grammatical corrections for enforceability. One example is that the Oxford comma is very important in coding, and so where that was important in different areas, we'd make some of those adjustments. Minor corrections to references from one section to the other, and then some other requirements. For example, the text on shared bike lanes was actually dangerous, and so we changed that. There's this concept. Florida DOT still has that in their books. I don't know why. They're becoming progressive, but not quite there, where they say a 14-foot travel lane is safe for a car and a bike. It's just not true. And they'll put the share off to the side, and that makes a dangerous condition for cyclists. So we corrected that, and other things like that. There weren't so many, just like one or two. And then some numeric standard adjustments and so forth. So then on expanding concepts, so these are concepts that were already in the code, but we added some detail to. One of these is this urban park strip, which essentially is between the sidewalk and the street. There's different ways that you can design that space. Most commonly, you have trees and tree pits in a very urban environment that have grates on them. And then you have grass strips. But there's actually something in between, which is sort of this long planter you get in much more urban conditions, but not on a retail street. And so we added that. You had in there some detail about curb radius. And so we added some new work that we've been doing on curb radius standards that deal with really specific conditions. We've expanded the entrance types, which we normally call frontage standards. There were a few in there. We added arcade and gallery and common entry, which are important for building out a plan like this. We adjusted towers slightly, and in this, I don't know if you've been familiar with any of our early work, like Seaside and so forth, in Florida on the coast, but there's this relationship of towers on a per lot basis, which give you these little points of light and views to the mountains and views to the lake here. And so we made some adjustments to the tower standards to enact that, and not so much really about the promenade, but more about the character of place overall. We completed the parking requirements by putting all the standards in one place, and expanded sign types. There's a few types that were missing, and we simplified the standards a bit. And then added these additional location requirements for parking standards, just that they really should not be between the street and the building relative to the front setback. Some simple things, but pieces that needed expansion. And then there's some things that we simplified that just weren't really impactful, or they weren't really complete or necessary. We did remove the photographs for the most part, except for one, which is actually quite a nice building. So I really couldn't pull it out. But generally, most attorneys suggest that you don't have photographs in codes, and so we heed that warning, took those out. We also found that some of the photographs and texts were contradictory, and so that's where you kind of get in trouble with attorneys, where they'll say, well, the text says this, but the photograph shows that. And so we made sure that the few that are in there really are implementing the code standards. So then there's other things like roof types didn't really do much, so you don't really need to analyze that. We kind of took that out. And then there's references to tables that didn't exist. We took a few of those out. We removed those. The amenity requirements were really, really specific, and that's something that the market is going to require of the builders. But also, when we talk about open space in a minute, there's an important piece with open space, which is that the amenity in the open space is the plan, is what we should be implementing in playgrounds and parks, on the promenades, and in the plazas and open spaces of the streets. So that really, in an urban environment, is the biggest amenity. And then we collapsed the uses just to simplify that a little bit. But really importantly was buffering requirements. There were buffering requirements in the mixed-use district, and that actually kind of destroys your ability to have a vibrant mixed-use area. So in that district, we removed that, but we left it in the single-family home areas. And then aligning to update the plan vision, we updated the district map and descriptions. So the map, you'll see the colors and locations are the same, but the streets implement that street network that we worked out in the updated plan. We relocated more of the commercial uses towards the town center station and town center mixed use area. Now we were discussing, I think one of the things that we need to update with staff is, what that number is, where you hit the 1 million square feet and so forth. And so that's something that we're working on. We added and adjusted the street types. Most of them already existed, and so we just had to sort of tweak a number here or there and added our illustrations. But we also added a few new street types as well. And then we adjusted the open space along the promenade so that it's reinforced with buildings on the edge. Now, open spaces, if you have an open space and another open space, that sort of bleeds the edge. What you need is the buildings there to hold it as an outdoor room. So we made sure that the open space standards encourage that. And then also adjusted the descriptions of the promenade blocks, block by block, for the adjustments that we made in the plan. And then the areas that we augmented, which were more substantial changes. The first is removing building types as a concept. Now, there's this entire Camp A and Camp B in form-based coding and building types. And DPZ, we're in Camp B, which is they're not a good thing to have in a form-based code. Some people in Camp A say you must have them in a form-based code. And so this is this big, huge deliberation between both groups. But even talking to people that are building type advocates, they suggest in a new plan, in a place you're implementing new development, and downtown areas specifically, they actually are not helpful, but they're most helpful if you're trying to protect existing housing. And so in this case, when we're trying to align these really complex and compact urban districts, urban blocks with parking embedded and so forth, it's really difficult to determine what type of building is this. For 200 feet, it's a mixed-use building. For 50 feet over here, it's a single-use building. It's attached to a parking garage. And when you start to try to figure out how all that works in a code, it becomes really complicated and difficult. So we removed those, but made sure that the new standards that are in place of that, one, implement all the standards that you already had in the building type requirements, and two, ensured that they met the standards that existed in the building types in aggregate. So that was one of the changes that we didn't know, is this going too far? But it's very important from an implementation standpoint to have that flexibility in terms of what the character of those buildings are. All the requirements remain that you have to line your property lines with buildings. The parking is behind buildings relative to streets. But it allows us much more flexibility in terms of having buildings and breaking down the character of those buildings to create the urban environment. But part of that also was ensuring that the standards that you had in the building type section were actually enacted in the code. And as we went through the existing building type by building type, I found that there were a lot of standards that actually did not exist in the tables. And so we made sure to align that. So the new table that's in there hits every point of the standards that are written in the text. Okay, so open space, this is another important one. Open space, we slightly redefined to be project-wide, not individual lot by lot. And that's important in an urban place, in a downtown type environment, because each one of those parcels doesn't have the sort of parks and open space for the project. Those are shared. So we didn't change any percentages, 20% is still there. All these standards are still in place, but we changed that from applying to a parcel by parcel specific basis to a project basis. And so that's a sort of change in thinking, but it's really important to be able to implement this. Otherwise, you would essentially not be able to have an urban building next to an urban building. You have all this extra open space as part of it. So we concentrate that open space in parks and plazas and promenades and so forth. We adjusted the stormwater management piece because mistakes often made to recommend stormwater management in streets on retail streets, and it doesn't work there. People just throw trash in the grasses and so forth. So we kept that in places where it should be, but not on the retail streets. And then the corner plazas. I had mentioned this in terms of open space next to open space causes that space to bleed. And so what we want to do is ensure that the buildings are up to the edge defining the space of the promenade. And now we have 2 promenades. And so those spaces are defined well along with the main street. So we don't want to erode the edge in that manner. So those are really the big changes that we looked at. So that's what I have in terms of a general overview of this. Again, if you want me to talk through the plan and details, I have all those slides on my computer. But I figured I'd just be open for questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that. We're in a joint session with the council, so I definitely want you to speak up as well. But I think we can dive into some of the details as we ask some of the questions. I think that's probably the best way to proceed. I know I have a few questions, but I'll open it up to the rest of the Planning Commission and Council if you've got questions to ask right off the bat.
So just out of curiosity, how How many residential units are you thinking about putting in this based on your current plans?
Well, I think we're still at 5,000, 6,000, something like that.
5,000.
Yeah, 5,100.
Okay.
Can I say something real quick on that? He mentioned in the code, in the one that has been circulated, there was a minimum of 600,000 square feet of commercial. And in our last meeting with city council, we committed to 1 million square feet of commercial. So as I went through it, it's 1 million. So I just wanted to point that out, that we talked about that on the drive down. We're adjusting that. That's not us trying to change anything. It was just a misunderstanding of what we're doing. So taking the village office, having more residential units to the north, we're putting an additional 500,000 minimum square feet of commercial in that south area.
Okay.
Wanted to throw that out.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so as far as like phasing goes, are you doing residential units first? Are you doing commercial first? Is it kind of a mix? Okay.
Both, and actually the phasing is focused on the creation of spaces. Well, first, there's the UTA station. So the front runner station in that area is key in the first piece, and then what they're planning to do is find ways to build out towards the center and the promenade. So it's really, the phasing is based on creating those spaces, and those spaces need residential units and commercial units to function.
Okay. And then as far as open space goes, before it was each lot needs X amount of open space. And I think that the idea behind that was that they can't get a building or they can't get certificates of occupancy and stuff until the park spaces are done. So how are you guys planning on finishing open spaces comparative to the building spaces?
Well, the promenade spaces are phased in the beginning.
Okay.
So within the first and second phases is the majority of the southern promenade, and then the northern one will be when the buildings around that
Okay.
come online.
Okay. Those were my main questions. Thanks.
Just kind of a more of a general question. What, again, back to the timeline, over how many years are we seeing this go from dirt to life?
Pete Evans. So the plan would be to start bringing it to life later this year. So roads, and then hopefully the first commercial and first residential building starting by the end of the year. And then overall, we think it's probably a 10 to 15-year project.
So it's kind of demand-based. I mean, it's going to be based on what the market is
Yeah,
yielding.
definitely.
And kind of the attraction to the area.
Yep.
Will determine the speed.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
that's
yes.
what I was trying to understand.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So we feel like, just based on the demand models that we've done, we feel like that this will be an in-demand project. And so we feel like if you were to compare this to a similarly situated project somewhere else, that we expect this project to absorb faster, both on the commercial and the residential. But yeah, it'll be up to the market to see if they have the same vision we do.
Is there anything we can do to, I mean, it sounds like, let's put it this way, are we doing everything we can do to expedite and motivate that?
Yes. Yeah, I think, we've been, the city has bent over backwards at all levels to try to get the project going as fast as we can, and we greatly appreciate that. I think just from an expediting standpoint, this is moving very quickly. I mean, Matt will probably tell you it's moving faster than they would like it to move. When they gave us their calendar and we said, no, it's got to be this, they said, we can't do it. And we were like, no, I bet you can. Yeah. So, yeah, I think top to bottom, everybody's been working hard to make this happen. And, engineering, getting us in and working with us on road design so that we can get out ahead of the UTA station, I think has helped UDOT and UTA stay motivated to get the train station open as quickly as possible. So, I think for a little while they were kind of saying, well, I guess we don't need it open that quick because you're not going to have roads. And we're like, no, we'll have roads. You need to have a train station.
Yeah, it's been faster than many other projects getting going. You're already moving dirt for remediation anyways, but I'd say that the movement forward has been quick, but not to the point of it's not opening up for areas. Like your point on us pushing us was like, all right, well, we got to push off this other project and focus here. And we've been able to do that because your timeline is, it's important with the transit station.
So you mentioned a minute ago that the first building would be up near the end of this year. So does that mean that, we'll be started at the end of this year. So that's kind of the time frame of when the rest of it will be infrastructure, putting roads in to support. Is that correct?
Yeah, we hope to start on roads this summer,
Okay.
this spring and summer. So we've got some remediation to do. Then we've got the kind of our phase one really is sort of Main Street coming down to that square about, the transit loop going up to the train station, and then a road going west out to the existing county road. So we have the 2 points of access. So that's kind of our phase one, and then right behind that is the promenade. And our plan right now is to improve the promenade the entire length. So back to your point, as far as open space being timed with the development, we're planning on being ahead of development with the open space because we really feel like that'll be a magnet as far as this placemaking goes. I mean, when people see that element, then there won't be really any guesswork as to how this is going to look and feel. It'll be like, this is really where we want to be. That's the plan. And so, right behind the infrastructure, we're working on architecture now for the first commercial building around the transit station area. And so we're hoping to be in permit for that shortly after the roads, and we can define where all those things are and where all the utilities are, and then begin construction as soon as we can after that. So late summer, early fall.
So I want to bring us back to the some of the changes that are being proposed, and I have three main questions. One's about the amenity requirements, the other's about open space corner plazas, and then the third one's about buffering. So first, you mentioned that some of the amenity requirements were removed and the market will dictate. Help me understand your thought process there, because the role of government is to set standards in place where the market won't dictate those, and there may be some necessary amenities that we view from our end that we wouldn't want to budge on. So could you take us through some of the thought process on those amenity requirements being removed?
Yeah, well, it was mainly that a lot of those get tied to the price point of different residential units. So some degree of amenity is essentially required by the market in anything you build. But the greater amenities tend to go with the price point of the building. And so the concern there was to have the amenities limit the sort of range of price points that could be brought to market and slow the project down. And so that was really the focus there, for one. And then for two, is that in an urban setting, where we're trying to program plazas and streets and open spaces and so forth, that tends to be the sort of amenity focus that we have. And it's not so much inside of the buildings as it is the space around the buildings where we want people to spend time. So that's the thought process.
Okay. I'd be curious, some of the council members that have spent some time developing the form-based code and the thought that went behind some of the amenities there, how you feel about that, what thoughts you may have.
You're referring to Christy, right? Or me? Oh, Chris, okay. Tice can get him on this too. I think there's a fine line in between both points that have been made. I think that while we want price point to have a wide variety of price point, there will be a lot of density given and impact on the city, and so the hope was to have this top notch, which I think they're trying to do. But it'll be interesting to see what exactly those changes are and what staff. I'm going to push this back on staff, honestly, and say that staff needs to go through with a fine-tooth comb and look at what potentially we're losing and giving up compared to what we're getting back in return. And so I think I'm relying on staff to give us that input line by line to know what we're actually losing.
Can I address that just really quickly?
Yeah,
So
please.
I think one of the things you heard Matt speaking to is just a fundamental difference between an urban multifamily development in a larger scale urban setting versus a standalone multifamily development in a broader setting. So, a lot of times these project-based requirements are really geared more towards a standalone multifamily development. So, for example, we're building 330 multifamily units in Lehigh, and it's got a clubhouse and a pool associated with it. But there's nothing else around it, really. And so that will be the amenity for the people who live there. When they're trading that private space for public space, that public space really comes in the form of whatever amenity package the multifamily developer is putting into that complex. Where in a broader urban environment, you're really planning the whole project and saying, okay, if we're trading public space, private space for public space, we're going to try to consolidate that public space area into more usable, more public outdoor spaces that are used by the whole community rather than just by the residents of that building, because there's a broader plan that's being executed there. Also, I think just from a market-driven standpoint, I mean, there wasn't, for example, this project in Lehigh that we're doing, there wasn't a requirement for us to do a clubhouse and pool there. But we felt like to be competitive in the market based on other projects, we needed to provide a clubhouse with a fitness center and a swimming pool, mainly because it was an isolated, standalone multifamily development. And so that's where I understand what you're saying, like, hey, there's this natural tension between the market and the government and making sure that we're regulating things that maybe the market doesn't really take into account, but we feel like is necessary. But I also feel like, where we've got we've got a broader development here, and we can look to how are we doing this public and private open space trade-off, and the fact that there is enough multifamily competitive development that whatever gets built will have to have a competitive amenity package to whatever's existing.
So just real quick on that, just a quick comment. I wanted to just echo that. I was going to almost say exactly what you said, that we should be worried about the public amenities, that the open space, the parks, the stuff like that, we should make sure that they're great, that they're really good. As far as private amenities, we wouldn't require a homeowner to build a pool in their house or a homeowner to have a theater room in their basement. Like, those people, the demand, it's demand based. So if somebody wants to build a complex that has a pool on the roof, then awesome. Maybe they'll have high demand for it. If they don't want to do it, then maybe they won't. But I agree that as the government is concerned, we should be concerned about those public open spaces, that the amenities are good for the entire city, not just amenities for one little complex.
Yeah, and based off of that, if I, part of the reason we had open spaces within those different blocks too, I thought there was a way for them to reduce open space, but then increase what you're saying on, right, the promenade and things like that. So as staff looks at it, I want to make sure there's a mechanism for, if we're losing that in that block area, how are we attributing that extra bump in open space or amenities to the public area like you're talking about, Bryce? I just want to make sure there's a quantifiable way to do that. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, there's just one point on that. That you're right, that was in there, very complicated. But
it was meant to be complicated.
Yeah, it's very complicated. But the goal really should, for us normally the goal is how far are you from playground, right? And and to be more specific, like we must, you must be within 800 feet of a playground is much more impactful than going through the loop. So I think some way to get all that in there without excessive complication is a goal.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's just how do we and I haven't read through the whole document yet, honestly, and I know we want to speed this up as fast as possible too, but I also want to say we are changing quite a bit. And so as long as there's a mechanism in there so that we can understand, well, what was lost and how is that being augmented at these new open spaces that everyone can go to, then I think I'm open to that.
Yeah.
Because I think there's still, the market will dictate private. I agree. Like if it's a private HOA, the market will dictate, hey, that needs to have a pool because those people that are going to be paying X amount of money to rent or whatever are going to demand that from you. But also realizing that if we gave something up, I need to see a quantifiable match in the open spaces we're getting.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I wanted to just point out, I think from an overall open space standpoint, we have more open space just in our main areas that we need for the whole development. We have quite a bit more as well. But I think our promenade design and vision for the promenade and vision for Market Street and the train station and then improving the lakefront, I think is well beyond what was originally envisioned. I mean, in our budget right now, I think we've got like $10 million slated for the South Promenade alone. So there'll be a lot of hardscape. It will be very, very unique and the magnet, which is why we want to build it first, because we think it's a real draw to residents and also commercial tenants. And then we're working really closely with the county. We'll talk about this, I think, later. But it's got, we're working on like a $2 or $3 million grant for the lakefront as well. So I think just those public open spaces right out of the gate, and then to say, because we're not saying we won't have amenities at all. It's just what we'd like to see is let the market dictate those private amenities inside the buildings. Let's work together to amenitize the outside and make those as nice and incredible as possible, not just for the residents here, but for the rest of the city. And then let's let the market dictate whether, because I think the original, before with pools, we may do a larger pool for a few more units centralized versus a bunch of small pools. Those are some of the discussions we're having, but.
Well, that's also where we threw the northern promenade on you guys. Where we said, making that other promenade connection to the lakefront is important, and having as part of that another square, not a plaza, which is more urban, but a square, which is still urban but less urban than a plaza, on the northern promenade, so that it can have the recreational amenities that are needed based on the scale of the space.
So, and I appreciate all this. Is really good, and we're getting a little bit into the weeds, and I apologize for that. But realize the amenities that we also require on the promenade and things like that, the RDA, unless you're just going to pay for everything yourselves, I'm assuming RDA will be paying for a lot of that. So that's the trade-off I'm talking about, is what was originally required, what did the RDA originally say we would potentially pay for, and this is what I'm looking at staff now, and potentially what do we need to augment what we're losing.
So I'll go back, since I was there when we built this 5 years ago. We built this 5 years ago because as the council then looked at our city, we weren't getting what we thought we were supposed to get. And we had a city growing, and we had that huge empty area up there, and we wanted it done in a manner that would be nice. So we put some railings in. Now, if you're taking those railings out, as Chris has noted, we want to see what we're getting. Because those rails were there because we didn't think, with nothing intended to anybody in this room, that we were getting what we were told we were getting. So that's why they're there. And it is a little distressing to some of us to see all the railings being torn down without evidence of what's going in. So keep that in mind as we go through this.
Yeah, and from just one point on the railings, though, that's where we tried not to make a lot of other changes. So a lot of the pieces that you have related to buildings and how those buildings will be designed and interact, we did not remove those pieces. So the point.
Well, I would just illustrate the cover picture. I don't know if that's the newest one that we were given when you mailed it out. I didn't see a whole lot of variation that we're looking for, so we don't have a monochrome going down the main street. Okay? Now, I realize that's just a rough, but I'm just saying there are expectations that you are going to meet or not meet in this group, and that needs to be ironed out along the way. I think months ago, when we first started this journey, I said very plainly, this is a journey that we have to do together, every single baby step. And we have to agree as we go along, rather than ending up in big meetings with a fait accompli, and everybody's going, well, where the hell did that come from? That just can't happen, okay? And I understand that's not what this is. We're nowhere near that. But that's just fair warning.
Chrissy, did you have? Oh, go ahead, Morgan.
You're the moderator. Whack. I'll sing for you. from staff side, I mean, we do have the same concerns regarding amenities, and I think the idea of providing some flexibility so that amenities can either be within the building or coupled or grouped together. I mean, the idea of providing something that could serve kind of a greater purpose instead of having, it looks like you probably have 100 different buildings there instead of having 100 small pools. Why not do like a large community center that the town center can benefit from, that can serve, a much greater purpose, and also provide a social atmosphere where people are meeting more than just their neighbors inside of their building, but it's an opportunity to create a gathering space. So I think that's something that Jake and I can work on with the applicants and see if we can provide a little bit more definition of what those amenities are. I mean, I think either like just providing the flexibility so that they could be in the building, or that they can demonstrate some sort of a community or showing where those amenities can go within the public realm, I think would be important.
Thanks, Morgan.
Also for me, because it seems as if, every picture you show us looks better and better. So I just want to say that up front. We're not derailing on this, maybe for you, but not really. But I think the hardest thing for me is it's new to us. Does that make sense? Like, so we're being told that 5-6 years ago that was now wrong, and those of us that went through it were totally wrong. Tice. But now we're supposed to say this is now correct. And so my question is, and it's hard to find a like-for-like match, is there another city that you would say is similar to Vineyard that has gone through this process that you've worked on that we could reach out to that's maybe 5-10 years ahead of us? Does that make sense? They've been through this. Because to me, that's part of how I'm evaluating what you've done to the plan, is I want to see where has it gone? Or is somebody going to come back in 5 years and say you were wrong, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly some that are a bit older, as examples. I can't always get them off the top of my head. I'm sure Jeff can, since that's a prompt to Jeff.
It doesn't have to be it can be getting back to staff. Give us some of
Yeah,
that. It's
yeah,
almost like a reference. Does that make sense? Because
Yeah.
we can go back and say, hey, yeah, it seems like it's worked. This was great. Or, hey, no, this part of it was really hard. We think you could look at it this way differently. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's plenty of those. And on the code side specifically, that's something that's always evolving. And so we're, right now in the process of finally 7 years late making a major overhaul to the standard code document that we use on a regular basis. But with every project, we're sort of making tweaks and adjustments and learning what's worked in places and what hasn't worked in places. So I think both from a development standpoint and from a regulatory standpoint, there's probably good connections to make there.
I think that this is also hard because there isn't a place like this that exists in Utah, and so I think that when the code was written 5 years or whatever ago, I think that it was made with the understanding of what was in place here in Utah and maybe the scope has changed a little bit to what if we didn't think about things that existed in Utah and we were thinking outside of that plane, and so that changes like the way that we think about it a little bit is what I keep thinking, and that's the part of this project that makes me the most excited is that it doesn't exist in this space or in this region right now, and that it is a magnet and it is a draw to the companies that will come here and to the businesses that will find their home here, and that will bring those places to be beautiful. And anyway, but I also would want to see like you were saying, like how making sure that we aren't giving up those. I don't want to use the word luxury, but like some of those places that are really going to put us on the map that we might lose if we don't have enforcement mechanisms in place.
So I would just like to say that I don't think anybody here wants to stifle creativity, amazing architectural opportunities. I don't think that's necessarily the government's place to regulate architecture. However, I think the idea is that the form-based code feels like a guarantee in some sort of way. It's like people are going, how can we guarantee that it's going to look nice, as Tice had said, right? I think there's a famous movie that talks about, guarantees being on a box or whatever. So I think the idea is that there needs to be some kind of mechanism where it feels like there's a comfort level with going forward. But we also understand that we want there to be some flexibility for creativity and innovation and all those things.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that more change happened in the plan than the code. And in the plan, more so in creating specifically the spaces and sequences of spaces and streets and, ensuring the sort of urban character of a town center and how it transitions to the lake and, things that we're illustrating in greater detail now. So more changes happen on the plan than are proposed on the code. And in fact, that's one of the reasons that I wanted to point out from the code standpoint that we didn't just take away things, we also added things. We said this is an important concept. Right now it's not enforceable, let's make it enforceable. Or here's a concept that we use all the time. These 4 additional pieces are missing, so we added those pieces, to really balance out, where we're looking for more flexibility but trying to add some degree of guarantee. So we certainly thought about it from both ways.
So kind of adding to what Christy said and looking at this in kind of an extreme point of view, there have been other developments in Vineyard that we had a code and a developer came in and they had this awesome plan and then it died and then, I don't know, 5 years later, somebody else came in and bought the land and just went with it and did something completely different than what the original developer had said. So I think that heaven forbid something happens with the company. I'm not saying that there would. I wouldn't want that. But if we want this code to be in such a way that if something happened, that some other company doesn't come in, buy the project, and just throw in whatever they want. And with that, we just want to make sure that there are guarantees that there's going to be commercial with residential. We want there to be guarantees that there are going to be amenities in the open space, that the open space is going to be done before buildings are done. We just want to make sure that in the code there are guarantees for these things.
Can I add one more thing? Oh, go ahead, Pete.
Well, maybe you could just briefly address why one of the first things you said to us was the problem with building types based form-based codes and the restrictions on the open space that we have. Because those are the real 2 big categories that you added more flexibility.
Yeah, which is the building standards and open spaces.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it was specifically so. The question is why did we focus specifically on open space and building types? And to us, it's because we've found that there's a difficulty with building types in terms of interpreting how they work in much more complex blocks. And so while there's outcomes that you're looking for, if you analyze the way that the building types themselves work to regulate that, it creates a lot of gray areas that are unclear. So we were trying to remove those gray areas because in a way I couldn't say we can do a parking garage that has attached to it apartments for 150 feet here that have individual entries, and we turn the corner and we want to do ground floor commercial and office above, for example. Like that was really not clear how that would work, and there's other pieces of code to regulate that sort of thing. So, you may be thinking specifically, Pete, about something that I had said, but it was really more so that when we've seen building types in codes, which we only ever put them in projects that are single-family residential primarily, and usually on the developer side of the fence versus the city side of the fence. But like I said, some people put it on the city side of the fence in existing places where you're worried about existing neighborhood character degrading over time. And it gets into what Christy brought up in terms of to what degree are you regulating architecture from a governmental standpoint, and all that sort of stuff is difficult, but I understand the goals. Now, from a building type standpoint, we went down that path because we thought, well, we could wiggle in here, but there's going to be a lot of questions in terms of interpretation as to whether or not, like these buildings, if we want to make these smaller blocks with pedestrian streets that are active with these plazas, does that really fit into the types? It was unclear. And now from open space was really a focus on not using the standards to degrade the urbanity that you can create, which is the discussion of, are you taking that 20% on an individual property, or are you doing it in terms of public playgrounds and plazas and so forth. And so it was going through that. Also, I read some of the specific requirements in terms of, say, trees and benches, and sort of drew that out. And I said, well, you're basically requiring 100% tree coverage for every single open space, even a plaza. And so that needed to be adjusted back a little bit in the number of benches. But, so we just went through really carefully all those with a thought in mind for making the public open spaces as good as possible. That's really, I don't know where you want, what else we had discussed on it. Basically we were looking at the plan and adding the open spaces that we added, and thinking that, these locations and configurations of the space are what was needed. Really, that northern promenade and especially that square that's on the eastern side is really important for creating activity somewhere between Geneva Park and the main promenade. And so that was an important thing to add.
One thing I would say is, I think depending on how the lakefront develops and the promenade, I think if that is something that is a jewel, I think that could also be something that helps facilitate better developments around it, if that's really quality construction and ideas. And so my question is, with the promenade coming in essentially first, is that something that's going to be phased over time in terms of projects and things that are going in it? Is it just going to be grass this year, and then next year there'll be a park or sculpture? How is that going to work?
Nate Hutchinson. So the plan is to plan it collectively. We've had a few meetings on the promenade space. The plan is this, get the roads going in first. One of the reasons why this brought up, and I'm glad we're having this really open, frank discussion here, because I'm grateful that we've all worked together long enough we can talk like this. I think from our vantage point, there was nothing in the code that you have that we were like, we didn't even want to change the code, Pete and myself. We're like, we can just do that. This was a few months ago before we met these guys. And these guys came in, and the vision that we were way down the line on another plan, as you guys remember. We were about $150,000 into that plan with some really good, capable experts in the country, right, out of California. And so it wasn't like just Pete and myself on our kids' scratch books writing this stuff. We actually paid a lot of money. But when we sat down and saw the vision that these guys had, we just said, that's what we positively have to do here, and we have to push pause on everything else and do this. So now we're into the planning phase here, about $500,000, and there's nothing in the code that we're like, oh, we sure hope that the city agrees to this because we're trying to do this. The code allows, right now, the code allows for things that I don't think the vision was intended, and Tice brought this up last time, that the way that the code ended up was not the vision, I think, and entirely. There's, and it's a good code. I hope this also isn't coming across like, well, the code sucks and we hate it and we want to redo everything. It's not. It's just when we sat down with these guys and we called KTGY our architects and they started designing the block, they said, it's like, we want to do retail with multifamily with commercial. What kind of a building is that? Well, it doesn't matter. The city, if we bring that building into the city, it will be okay. That's the vision that they have for this. But that's not the way that this works, right? It's like, well, it has to meet the code. And so what we tried to do was get these guys with our architects to say, okay, this is the vision we all have. Let's come up with a plan that works, that helps us get this vision. And they're definitely, we didn't expect tonight to come in and you guys just say, this is perfect. But here, everything you're saying, it's not like we have leaving here like, oh no, this is terrible. We can't do any of this stuff. It's just you hear what we're saying. It doesn't make sense to build 100 small pools. You all hear that and say, no, we agree with that. That makes sense, right? I'm hoping, at least that's what you said. So it's just those things I think that we can work through, and maybe it's just a couple of these items. But I don't want you guys to feel like our vision is to make this nicer than I think the current code allowed. And hopefully to this point, everything we've done and the tons of money that we've spent to get us to this point, you're feeling that. And I know there's a little bit of like, can we really trust these guys? And we're looking at you like, can we? But hopefully we've been here long enough and done what was expected. And we envision this to be nicer than anything we've ever done in our lives. And we think we don't want to sell this. Our plan is to build and own all of this. Now, that's not to say we'll never sell it. If someone from New York comes and says, we'll pay you $100 billion, you never know. But the plan is to create something that's a very long-term asset that needs to be built well enough, because it is going to take a long time to build through. So I just wanted to say that from the outset so that you're hearing that from us as well.
Thanks.
Well, and we've been in discussions and with Jeff here on the Magic Phone so far about setting the pace with the first buildings that go vertical too, because it's important that, just with the open space, making having a very specific plan and concerted design for the open spaces and ensuring that those from the beginning are good. It's the same thing with the buildings. And so we've probably spent way too much time in CAD that we didn't expect to do for the sort of plaza and this first street, and these guys are hounding us like crazy. But it's similar for the buildings, and I know that Jeff has been specifically focused on that, and so we've been having those discussions as well. These first couple of buildings, what's the scope? Who can we get to work on this? Like, let's make sure that these are gems that set the pace for the rest of it. So that's certainly been a discussion.
John, you had something?
Well, the only thing I was going to say is, as I've read more code in the last couple of years than I've ever imagined or thought I would ever care about paying attention to. And in the last week, I've spent many hours reading this code. And if we can continue to do this 9-page, 8-page summary of the changes, things that simplify this for us that are not city planners, builders, never really intended to be a part of, I didn't realize I'd be doing this at this point, but it's really neat and really fun. Everything you continue to do to dumb it down and make it plain so that because we don't know what we don't know. And that's really what you're dealing with. And so we just, all the help you can continue to give us so that we understand what's happening in this process. Like Ty says, this is a process, the better. And we appreciate that. I appreciate that.
I think that in the thread that you were talking about dumbing it down, that communicating this out to the rest of the community at large, like all the rest of us that have been sitting in this room have had lots of conversations, lots of planning, lots of ideas that have been thrown around, and I know that there's probably a plan. I don't make any assumptions that there isn't a plan to communicate with the community. I know there's always a plan, but I just think that there's a lot of questions in the community that come up all the time about it, and that I get asked by my neighbors or whatever about it because they know that I serve on the planning commission, and so I hope that in the spirit of dumbing it down, that we're also trying to come up with some ways that we can I know it sounds stupid, but talking points that we can start to get people excited about and get some kind of groundswell of community support behind some of the ideas that are here too.
So I think you touched on my question for open space corner plazas. Chris brought that up earlier. I did want some clarity on the buffering that you mentioned and some changes there, and with the overall help us understand that we will actually get the mixed use, because when I first heard the changes in the buffering, that was the first concern that popped in my head.
Okay, so those are two different things. So the buffering is a landscape requirement that usually occurs between properties of different uses, and so there is a requirement in there for buffering landscape between different properties, but that doesn't work in a mixed-use urban environment, because essentially you have zero lot line buildings or very close to zero lot line buildings, so you can't have 7 feet of a hedge in between them. And actually you don't want 7 feet of a hedge, because now that starts to degrade the ability for that, the buildings to be close to each other and interact in that way. And so we left all those standards in there, but we said they apply to the single family residential portion and not to the mixed use portion of that.
Okay, that
And
helps.
then the other piece on the mix of uses, that's still in there.
Okay, I was conflating that with the buffering. I thought you were saying the...
All that stuff on the mix of uses is still in there. Like we said, we're just adjusting the numbers for how things are moving around. And as we discussed, the 1 million square feet and where that lands. But I would say in anything that changed that mix of uses piece, almost nothing changed there.
Got it. Thanks for that. That's all the questions I had. If are there any more discussion
I just
points
had
that
one
you
more
think of?
comment.
Please, Tim.
And I'll make this again as we talk about the lakeshore frontage and all of that. Most of us have pet parts of our jobs here. Some want walkability, some want good bike access and so on. My pet part is on preserving and promoting history. And so as we move forward on this part of the plan and on the lakeshore, I would ask that, and I can't give you a specific idea, but in all of it, we are now building on a very rich historical area. And it would be a tremendous shame to lose that perspective of history as we build new modern buildings. And so I would just ask the developers and the design and everything, whether it's in the buildings or in use of the open spaces or curbs or benches or whatever it is, that we are doing all that we can to make sure that we preserve the history that we have and that we promote it and educate others about it. So, and I don't know exactly what that would look like, but as you move forward, I would just really encourage you to do that, because we do not want to lose that in this community.
In addition, you have the naming of spaces, the naming of streets, and one thing on the open space that's important, I'm not really sure how you all are doing this together, but because I'm sure you'll work together on that, which is the programming of the open spaces. And one of the most important things to accelerate the build out, but also to create the community that you want to create here, is to program these spaces with events and activities and regularity. And so that's another opportunity.
Okay, I have a question. It's about codifying affordability. We see a lot of other tech hubs outpricing their employees, and I feel like I have legitimate concerns about that happening here. I see it happening already in Salt Lake, where all they're building is luxury housing, and people can't live where they work, which is half the point of the city center. So I'm wondering, what are your plans for ensuring that this doesn't happen here?
I don't know if you guys have anything, because I can talk about affordable housing for days. Well, and sort of the regional implications. And
We
stuff.
only care if you have the answer, though.
No, well, the answer is that nobody has the answer, because one of the answers is that we haven't built enough housing, and we have a decades backlog of supply, especially after 2008. Not that we were building the right thing. I don't think we were building the right thing before 2008, but so that at least reset people's mindset. But then there was this drag for 5 to 10 years, depending upon where you are, where no housing was built, and now like everything's unaffordable. And so in some places people have gone towards inclusionary zoning, and they've seen let's say the limits, like if you have over 50 units in a building, then there's a certain percentage. Well, they've seen all their applications over 50 units, 50 unit buildings drop, and everything's below 50 units. It's just like this really hard problem, because we haven't been creating places like this. And then it becomes hard, because there's going to be a demand for this place, because you don't have other urban centers like this in the region. You should, but you haven't been getting them, and they haven't been built in a long time. And so,
Right.
that's sort of like this larger existential issue, because we see it everywhere, like not even just tech hubs. Also in, like I was working recently in a community that's mostly single-family neighborhoods with a nice downtown in Metro Detroit, and they're concerned about affordability. And the problem is that there's not enough places that are walkable and have an urban core and have the amenities that people are looking for. And because there's so few of them, that becomes, competition, pushes them up. So, I mean, I don't know if you have anything to touch on it, but it's a really tough thing.
Nate Hutchinson. I think the county-wide, we build about 2,000 to 2,500 rental units per year in the county, in Utah County overall. This plan, our plan is to build some for sale, some for rent, different products, but another about 500 units per year just out of this site. So I mean, fundamentally, the housing crisis right now is a supply and demand. I mean, there's lots of things. There's land, there's cost, there's regulatory issues, there's cities don't grant density, require too many things that people can't actually afford to pay for, which we're seeing in some of our more rural communities. Eagle Mountain, for example, we have some problems out there with, they're requiring things on their exterior elevations that people just simply don't want to pay for.
Right.
And so it's like you lose a bedroom in your house because you have to have a certain percentage of stone on your exterior, for example. And it's like, our view on that would be, obviously you have to have some standards so you're not building just ugly boxes, but however, give it as an option. And if someone would rather a fourth bedroom for one of their children than stone on their house, let them decide it. But now they've decided that everybody has to do it. And so therefore, pricing automatically goes up $4,000 or $5,000 and you lose some of those other things. So I think just simply providing the amount of units we're going to be able to build here next to transit. I mean, there's a lot of things with clean air and a lot of things that this site does that why we think the state is excited about this, transit's excited about this, UVU is excited about this, the lake. I mean, there's just all this site is just so unique because it converges with all of these different uses and so I think that's supply and demand is probably the biggest way I'd respond to that.
Okay.
I mean, we don't have rent controls or anything in here, but
Right.
we do have a lot of units, so to absorb those, I don't think they're gonna be out of sight.
Okay. Moving in more on that also, the hope is also that we have more businesses on the commercial side and retail and not just, 6 giant businesses, right? So I'm wondering if you guys, what is your plan for that as well?
So I think the vision for that, so retail is a function of foot traffic and density. And I think we've got a lot of residential units. Our plan is to build a large commercial building right next to the train station, right out of the gate, which I think we've talked to some staff and council about this. And then, the main floors of these units, we want to make sure that the retail that we have here is very, what's the word? Viable, and so we're very vibrant, so that we have retail that actually people go to and use, so that it's not a revolving door and makes the whole community feel and look dormant. So we're being very methodical with retail consultants on what retail to bring, how much of it can we absorb and how quickly, so that it actually becomes a downtown that is very vibrant. And so I think we're working that way. And then from the office standpoint, because of the way that we can share parking between office users and multifamily users, the goal is to build as much commercial offices as can possibly be absorbed. As many people as will come. That's why we're speccing a building. Everyone says, you're crazy, no one specs office. We're saying, well, we're convinced if we do the promenade right from the beginning and the train station opens, we build a building, people will come. So I don't know if that answers your question entirely. It might not get to, because that might be more of the larger companies than what you're referring to.
I just, it's like it was brought up in previous work sessions where we don't want to have an entire block dedicated to a hotel. And we don't want to outprice local businesses because the retail space is too big. Those sort of issues. So can we keep that in mind as we keep writing the code? Thank you.
Okay, can I add something to that really quick? So what I've seen with like what Salt Lake does, where they have one, because they have those massive blocks that are 10 acres and they're really big. So what they do is they'll have one development on a block sometimes or on a street frontage, but then the ground floor they'll have smaller retail spaces. So it might be a hotel with a restaurant and a retail shop and things like that to break it up. So I think there's ways where they could do a large hotel on a whole block, but then break up the ground floor so that there's more pedestrian interest.
Not a block of lobby.
Yeah, just a giant lobby or a wall.
Yeah, which shouldn't make financial sense either to have a block of lobby. As long as you have housing and office, then you can actually fund food service, for example. You know, you need both. You need both the daytime customers and the nighttime customers, and now you can activate those spaces. So I mean, that's how it's planned, and that's the way we're moving. That's the way we're moving forward.
Yeah.
But it's certainly going to be based on having the people and the jobs in order to drive that.
Right.
We hope that's an issue. How do we break up all this commercial?
Fingers crossed. It would be nice, you know, to move there and not have to drive for everything because it's not there.
All right, thanks for everyone's questions and comments. I don't want to cut this off before we're done, but council, any further comments or discussion?
Yeah, I like the affordability discussion, and I don't think there's ever a right answer, and so it really is going to take, in my opinion, a cooperative approach from developers, you know, public, nonprofits, charities. I mean, so hopefully we can look at that as it moves forward, because I think what I heard at the beginning was we do want a variety of price points. And so to me, that means there is a hope that there would be an affordability. I'm not saying you put in rent floors or restrictions, but hopefully there's a way that we can help promote affordability, because we want a wide gambit of people that can live here. And the same can be said, I think, when it comes to retail. Doesn't even know what to do with itself right now. So, I mean, it's just going through a weird time.
Well, or if you're in a walkable Main Street, it's doing better.
Right.
And if you're in a place where the residents support that Main Street, then it's doing well.
Right.
But those are fairly rare.
But I would also, playing a little devil's advocate too, we can't be afraid of if there is a big user that wants to come in, because there are some big users that you would want to be here that would make it a more vibrant community as well. And so I think just like there's a wide variety of price points for people that can afford to live here, there's a wide variety of businesses that want to be here. We don't want to push out all white collar or all blue collar. We want a wide variety. And that's what I think will make Vineyard dynamic going forward. So I appreciate the flexibility in the plan for something like that.
You want to diversify, just like financial. You need to diversify uses, diversify the levels of each use.
Thanks, Chris. Any other comments before we close this discussion?
Anthony.
Oh, yes.
Like Morgan said at the beginning, the staff's going to be going through this with a pretty fine-tooth comb and just compiling a list for maybe our next meeting. I don't know when that meeting is going to be, but we'll be working with the developers on this. So if you have thoughts or comments that come up over the next few days as you look over this, please email those to us so that we can incorporate those into our discussions and take everything into consideration.
Okay, thanks, Jake. I think council touched on this too, that the reliance on staff will be big moving forward. So we'll definitely pass along information to you, Jake. Thanks. All right. If that's it, we'll wrap up discussion 2.1 and move on to discussion 2.2. Morgan, would you do the same and kick us off on this one?
So we do have this. So the code is publicly noticed for next week on Wednesday with the Planning Commission, and then with the City Council on the 11th. And so we do have it noticed. Now, you guys do have the ability that if you feel that the code isn't ready and it sounds like there's a few edits, we'll still hold the public hearing, but you do have it on your ability, your authority to continue it to a date certain. And so you can push it back. And so we'll do our best to work between now and Wednesday to have a code that addresses the issues that you've talked about. And most likely we'll be trying to work with the applicants before then to just kind of tighten some things up. But anyway, don't feel too pressured. You want to get it right. So what we wanted to show you now is the lake plans. Do you need is this all you need? So as you know, we have the application for the tourism grant through the county that we've been working on. And this affects the lakeshore. The area that we are identifying under the grant is essentially everything from
the Clegg Farm up north to the detention pond. So it's most of our frontage, minus the Wacara Way Conservation Area, which is, they're sort of, we're working with them, but they're doing their own thing because they're going for funding through the state. And where we can, we're going to try to align with what they're doing. And all we wanted to do tonight was just show you the plans that that we have so far. These are still kind of in a draft stage. They've been submitted to Eric Ellis, but we have until I believe Friday to make some final edits. We need to be clear that this is Anderson Geneva working with and not Flagship. That's one of those things. I think we're making some edits throughout. And Liz, as we, I'll just kind of jump through a couple of these main themes, but she's been working pretty hard on this. If you want to jump in on anything, feel free. But the plan is that we're working on essentially 2 phases. So we're showing a phase 1, and I believe that's in the other exhibit. There we go. So phase 1, we wanted to try and play off of the work that Anderson Geneva is doing on Promenade, the Lake Promenade. So we wanted to try and to reestablish that beachhead that is sort of there now, but we wanted to make it official, clean it up, bring in some sand. So that would be the area between the north and the south promenades. As you know, was successful in obtaining a grant for parking and for drop-off improvements for like paddle boards and canoes, kayaks. And so this would incorporate that. So we would use the grant that she got there to help be a match for this grant as well. One thing that's pretty interesting is we're trying to look forward at kind of long-term how the 2 piers could be used. And there's the concept of having a lighthouse at one end. And we've also talked about making like number 3 a place where you could do a restaurant in the future. So looking at like a specialty restaurant that could sit out on the pier. And so looking at just some really cool concepts that could help enliven and create more activity on the northern promenade. You'll see the 7, that's a sand, I believe it's a sand saver. It's a mechanism of basically a wall that goes under the water that helps to capture the sand from the beach so that we're not having to bring in new sand every couple of years. So that basically we would pull the sand back up and restore the beach as it deteriorates through the seasons. And so 5 also would include those trail improvements that that were shown with the original grant. And then, so that would be the hope for this next grant. I believe the total amount with everything puts us somewhere in the range of I think $7 million. So it's pretty extensive. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe Bronson, you can jump in, but does that include the dredging as well? Would that include? Was that priced out?
I'm pretty sure,
Yeah, because one thing we didn't want to do is, so this is the cost breakdown. We didn't want to put all those improvements in and then have muck. You walk out there and you're, 100 yards out and you're only 6 feet in water. So if we can dredge it and get some depth there with the sand barrier, that it provides a pretty sustainable environment for a beach that we can maintain there on out. I believe the Utah Lake Commission assisted us with a grant for a beachcomber as well to help maintain it. So that, yeah, great. So it was included. So that would be for this next go around. It's been submitted. If you do have any changes, please look at it. If you have some tweaks, some things that you want us to look at, please submit those. We have until Friday before we need to finalize it. And just kind of briefly, phase 2, we wanted to include everything in this exhibit to show that it's part of a larger plan. Phase 2 would look at trying to establish a marina, a cable park. We know that that's been a topic of interest with a lot of the commissioners and the council. And so we wanted to kind of identify that and have some placeholders. And so that would be trying to utilize that detention basin at a much higher level. Obviously, it's going to take a lot more research studying on how we can use that. But just showing the state that basically phase one is part of a larger plan with phase two. Do you have any questions or anything like that?
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
So let's say that the water levels are like they were 3 years ago. How do we deal with water? Because the level was like 100 yards out to actually be at the water. So for that whole area where 7 is in the seawall, like how can we ensure that there's water there?
So that's not even beyond that. It doesn't turn into a city pond.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what-
No, that's
didn't
a
you
good
say
point.
part of it is dredging as well?
Yeah.
Because if we could dredge that out, it would be deeper.
Yeah.
But I think what you're saying is that it might even be beyond that part.
And
so
even
it's
if we
dry.
dredge it out,
That's a good point.
we don't want stagnant water there because that'll get gross real quick.
Right. That's a
So
good
just
point.
kind of thinking, how do we make sure that there's
So
water
that-
flowing in and out?
That dredging line we should look at making sure that it hits kind of where the low mark is.
Deep enough, yeah.
Does on the trails, do we put any like, I don't want to call them like safety stations where there's like somebody could call from, or if there are any issues down there? We're going to have a lot of people down there, and I'm just wondering if in this grant request, have we account for any of that?
No, we haven't. So, but that is something that we could look at potentially adding. And like are you talking about like at a university, how you have like a call box or something? You can,
Morgan, what's phase one timing? I reviewed this, but I don't remember the timing on phase one.
maybe Jake, can you help me out with the phase one? I mean, we're submitting now for it, but if the funds were made available, do you know when that would be? March? Okay.
It starts in March.
Yeah.
If we get the funding, I think they decide in March, and then after that, there's, sorry, I
And just to clarify, if I read right, there's a whole lot of sand being brought in that's nice sand, not mud, that we'll be walking on.
Oh,
'Cause
and
it's
I
gross
think
down there right now.
Part of
I
the
mean,
hope is to
it's beautiful, but it's not a beach.
when you
at all.
remove the Phragmites and some of the invasive plants, and then we have the beadcomber that's going to try to clean up the area. We may find that some of that is good, but we're anticipating bringing in sand.
Okay.
So
Morgan,
I'm not sure the cubit.
there's
cubic,
sand. There's sand out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sand along the uplands there. We've already reviewed this. The Lake Commission knows what's there. Yeah, there's mud out there now, and it will require dredging, and we'll have to re-dredge it in about every 10 years, according to what Provo's gone through with the Provo Boat Harbor, okay? So there's a lot of things here, but there is also a lot of assets there, you know. This is not anywhere near finished. This is a big project, and we have to accept the fact that this is a lake. It operates on its own rules, okay? So it's not always going to be perfect like we want it, and you have to try to make some arrangements as best you can with it. But for right now, for example, the lake's at 100%. All the reservoirs are at 85 to 90%. So according to what we've discussed on the Lake Commission, we have a good 4 years of maximum level in the lake. Much less that we've got 120% rainfall presently, snowfall, in the Provo River drainage. You're not going to see that like 100 yards out for a while, okay? There are some issues that we haven't dealt with yet, like mitigation of some of the stuff that's down there, and our discussions with the state, how to do that. There's some people at the state level that want to preserve all the dandelions, just as a humorous note, et cetera. So this is a great concept. All the issues are there, okay? But there's also resolution for most of these issues. And if the plan is done right, we shouldn't have major problems down the road. This is not going to be done next year. So don't get that idea when you ask about the timeline.
Yeah, just so you know,
Still ask.
this exhibit was this exhibit was just put
I
together
always do.
for the grant. So
Morgan, what about
we've
volleyball
talked
nets?
about
Posts, are we doing
what's
posts
that?
in the sand, volleyball posts in the sand? Is that happening?
Sure.
Well,
Yeah, we
sure,
can-
it's a
yeah.
beautiful answer, but is that a part of it?
Yeah.
I didn't see that in the
Is there
plans.
one in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think in our history, you're right, it's not necessarily disciplined unless PDC put it in there and let you see it, but.
I mean, because there's a lot of things that
That's right,
businesses
yeah.
will bring in, like the kayaks and things to rent and blah, that's great. I meant what amenities are we gonna, just the post and then people can bring their own nets, or are we gonna do, to what level are we discussing this, I guess? We're not that far? Okay, all right. Okay, then I won't, I love the idea of sand right now. We can bring our own poles and nets if we need to. Love it.
What you're seeing here is an exhibit just to get the grant. Well, we've talked about potentially working with a designer to actually do a more detailed design on the lake shore, and so I think that's basically where we need to go with this. But this is just to kind of get those major components in, for just the purposes of the grant.
So I like the thought of a lot of this. And just something real quick that I think I would add is, as far as sand goes, we have the whole area where where it protects the sand. It has a sand saver or whatever. I think that we could still, if we're getting rid of the Phragmites, add sand to the shores, and it would stay high enough up. I mean, the waves don't come that high onto the shore that it could still be sandy, and if you wanted to go into the water, then it would be muddy for whatever. But I think it would be cool to at least have an area on most of the shore that's sandy, that's a place that you want to walk at least, whether it's sand or something that's not mud.
Yeah, it's great.
I think I saw on this, maybe it's this, where we're talking about maybe an educational center, something like that. I see that up on the northern part of the plan. Of course, on south of this, they're hoping to bring back a lot of waterfowl and native, birds and so on. This is going to be highly used by humans, we would hope. But is there any thought at all about what could be done in this area to promote waterfowl as well? Anything that would be more of, rather than human recreation, anything that would allow people to be able to look out over the water and see things happening that didn't used to happen there.
Yeah, I mean that was a big that was one of the big points with the two piers, is that so you could kind of penetrate the waterfront a little bit and get out there and have some viewpoints out into the lake. I think what you're talking about, if going a little further, we may need to look at in kind of a larger plan if we want to add some more details. If there is
Osprey
like a
nests,
habitat or something like
things
that.
like that we're trying to bring up from the Provo Pier up in further north. If there's anything like that, or just natural nesting areas, I mean, I don't know, because this is great to have humans there, but it would enhance it if we had nature to some degree.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, just down a half mile down, you have the Walk Our Way project where they're doing a ton of that. So,
Right, and so I'm hoping that we can bring some of that here as well, so that people don't have to go to the Walk Our Way to see some of nature.
Well, and Nate's pointed out, we do have the kind of the wetlands area that we've delineated on the top, and I don't know if we call that a wetlands, or if that's something where we could provide some habitat for birds. I know, I don't know. I think there's some pretty creative things that we could do with that detention pond.
It would be
I think
great
you
to
kinda
have
speak to it.
school classes come to
Yeah.
an education center or something and be able to get hands-on in doing
Mm-hmm.
things with, I don't know, snails, or I don't know, whatever,
go.
you know?
Get the snail club, the Vineyard Snail Club.
Yeah,
going.
Vineyard Snail Club.
It's going to be a real popular one.
Yeah.
The boat, go to the boats and see who's going.
No, that's great. I appreciate your comments. If you have any more comments, send it to us. We have till Friday to submit this. But this, so you know, this grant wasn't to include like every detail, but just the main components, and then we would do a plan in the future that could be a lot more detailed and kind of address a lot of your comments.
Morgan, that last remaining trail connection from the southern end of the existing Utah County Trail to what was just done by the Sunset Beach Park, would that be part of this grant as well, or is that already slated to go in, that gap trail connection?
Yeah, that's That's part of the Lakefront and Town Center, the Edge Homes
Okay.
project. I believe we're working with them. Don or Chris may be able to speak a little bit more to that, but the plan is to try to get that built, I believe, this year. Yeah,
Okay, just checking.
yeah, absolutely.
Any additional questions on this grant discussion? None?
So is it intended that the grant will be entirely granted in 1 year, or is it over several years that the full 7 million will come forward?
I'd have to look at the time frame. Jake, do you know the time frame spending? No, he's not listening, but typically those grants have a time frame. And 2.5 years.
3 million in phase one, and they have not said anything about a future phase. Right now, they're just deciding this, but then we feel like if we get the first phase going,
Yeah.
hopefully phases down the line, we'll be good. And if not, we'll have to kind of work together to figure out how to do it. We're also working with the state on some other funding opportunities. 'Cause we feel like this is a really unique place that can be a really regional amenity. It's the only place on either Utah Lake or Salt Lake, or the Great Salt Lake where you can get to the lake from transit, right? I mean, and we're improving that, so we're showing that in this plan to them that we're improving it's in walking distance, and we're improving it from the train station to this area.
Yeah, I mean, it's if we could make it coincide with the establishment of the promenade, then you're getting that kind of that full length complete out into the lake as well. So could be really exciting over this next year. So,
Right.
well, yeah, let us know if you have any suggested changes for probably by Thursday, so we can get it updated for Friday.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Morgan, for the updates. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
A second, anyone?
I second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.